My name is Sif Savery. I am from Denmark and I'm an animation director and animation supervisor. I've known that I wanted to become an animator for a pretty long time. I remember the magic sort of beginning when my dad got a DVD player, which was the first time when you could go from frame to frame to frame and see what was going on. And that was sort of the moment when it became visible that there was a human behind it, because there were a lot of little errors when you were just looking at every drawing rather than the whole picture. And sort of realizing that it was not just a button that somebody pressed, but that there was real human intent and error behind it. And then later on, I started becoming very active in the indie animation community, where you saw people starting out from very rough rudimentary animation, and you could see how people developed into stronger animators and improved their craft. And that sort of showed me a path of whatever means you had available, whether you're just drawing with a mouse on the computer to start off with. It became visible that there was a path into creating some of those cooler animations that I really wanted to make. I just jumped into it because I was part of these online communities on sites like Newgrounds, where you got a lot of insights into how to do very rudimentary animation, like Flash was very big. We had this thing called fan flashes, where you would do like little pieces of animation inside the Adobe Flash software and put them out on Newgrounds and YouTube for others to see. And I was around 14 when I went from making these short animations that were like 30 seconds to actually being like, yeah, I could make a whole series at this point. So I made the very first pilot episode of my longtime project, Tales of Zale, which that episode was 6 minutes long. I made it when I was 14, and then I went on to efterskole. So I went straight from my efterskole with 3D animation to visual HF, where I got to learn more hand-drawn, just drawing fundamentals. And then from there, I could get into the animation workshop. So I had a very clear 1, 2, 3 step path into animation. So I did additional internships while I was studying. I did an internship at Nørlum, which has become a studio that I've worked with for a long time now. And then I wanted to expand my horizons a little bit, so I convinced the school to let me do an exchange in Korea at the Chungkang College of Cultural Industries, where I learned under a previous Disney animator. And then I also convinced them to let me go to a director school in France called La Poudrière, where I did 3 months of studying script writing for TV series and TV specials. And then after that, I did my internship at Cartoon Saloon, which is a really great animation studio in Ireland. While I was doing all that, I was also making Tales of Zale as a web series. I made an episode 1 and a 2, and I started on a 3. But at that point, I'd learned so much from all these other educations that what I'd started to make as episode 3 felt very outdated very quickly. So when I came out after that Cartoon Saloon internship, where I just tried to absorb all the knowledge, and I decided that rather than taking a job at Cartoon Saloon, I wanted to try to put all of that learning into that project. So I settled in Viborg at the Open Workshop, an artist residency that's now called Filmværkstedet Viborg, where you can get to develop your own projects and even do some production. And then Corona hit, which meant that there weren't a lot of traveling opportunities. So I stayed at the Open Workshop a little longer and ended up finishing that 3rd episode that then became a short film in itself. And then I started working in the animation industry at Nørlum and all that sort of stuff. I just had a dream about a fox in a desolate world, and when I woke up, it was just I just had that atmosphere ingrained into my head, and I just needed to get it out. But as I developed it further and made further iterations, I had to ask myself, why do I keep coming back to this, and why is it appealing so much to me, and what is that I want to tell with that story? And when I really dug into it, I found that it was a story that I'd come up with in a very tumultuous part of my life. When I was 14 years old was also when my father died. So it is a story about dealing with loss, and that's something that I only really found out about later on, but that's one of the reasons why it's so important for me to keep that desolate human world present in the story. Because it's a story not just about how the world can be ruined and how scary that world can be, but it's also a story about how life rises from the ashes despite that. And that's sort of what's been following me in that project as I developed it further, because it came at a very desolate time in my life, but it also became such a source of joy in my life later on. And that's something that I really wanted to put into the project and put into the world. And that's why I really wanted to keep doing that project. I never wanted to tell a depressing story with this. I want to bring people along, give them a space where they can feel just like I felt, and also finds the silver linings and the joy in life despite all these things. After I made the Tales of Zale short film, which is called Tales of Zale Flickering Lights, which was based off of the original idea I had for episode 3, that's when I also started pitching it as a TV series. As I was going around, I picked up talks with Studio Nørlum again, and we started pitching it together and developing it and getting more rounds of development through West Danish Film Fund and other support networks, and that's how we've been able to develop it as far as we have at this point. So we've been able to get development money, but production money, like getting the right amount that would need to be going into production, that's a little bit of a tougher hill to climb. And I felt like it was a shame just to wait around rather than to act a little bit on the momentum and the support that exists. And I felt like there was an opportunity to take some of the pilot episode work that we developed in collaboration with DR and see if we could get funding to actually produce that and sort of put the choice in the viewer's hands. So I wanted to try to do a little bit more of a direct, hey guys, do you want this? Then you have the opportunity to help us get there. And that's why I made a Kickstarter for the project, and I launched the Kickstarter at the end of February 2026, and it went way above my expectations. So there was a lot of support, and we ended up getting almost 900,000 Danish kroner of support, and it enables us to bring that pilot episode directly to the viewers, and hopefully also give us a little bit more ammunition when we're doing our funds applications, because we can say, like, there is an audience for this, they have come out in droves and shown that they want this. At the very least, we can produce that pilot episode and bring that out to people so that they don't have to wait for 8 more years for funding to go through. I do have other stories that I would really love to tell. I have a whole list, like there's a long list of projects I'd love to work on. But I do feel like with animation, it just, any project is gonna take ages. So rather than shifting from project to project and being a little bit unfocused, if there were no path forward for Tales of Zale, maybe I would start moving to something else. But as long as I see a path forward, I wanna keep pushing, and I wanna, keep respecting all the support that has come. So I want to do everything that's in my power to bring that to fruition. And then hopefully at some point I can do some other projects as well. Like, I'm not a one-trick pony, I got other projects too. When I was just learning to do animation, I made a lot of different short films. I participated in animation competitions that entailed that you make a short film 1 to 2 minutes in 3 weeks. So I got to work on a lot of different types of projects, and I got to learn a lot about how I relate to projects through that. I try to do different genres. I try to do like different superficial stories, and I always got annoyed working on them because I couldn't find myself in it. So whenever I try to work on a project now, I try to start with finding something in a character, something in a world that I personally relate to, and I use that as a springboard. And I think it's almost impossible to work on something that you don't put yourself into, or that you can't reflect yourself in some way. That doesn't mean that every story is about you in any way, but it just means that every story is human in the same way that you're human. And I try to use that as a starting point, just finding that feeling or situation or character trait that I relate to and starting from that. I mean, I think you gotta start by looking outward and then look inward from there. Like you're looking in a mirror when you're looking at the world. You just need to find the right aspect that you can relate to. Like I have a story that I want to tell at some point about the feeling of justice and injustice in the world, told through the perspective of a elementary school kids. And you know, it all harkens back to some things that, you know, I've grown up with and experienced. And of course, when I'm doing stuff that is related to kids audiences, I draw a lot from my childhood, because that's when these feelings have been the biggest. I don't have one specific thing that inspires me. I take inspiration from the stories that are out there, and then I try to find out what it is that, you know, on a human level, you know, catches me in those stories.
All right, bedtime. Huh?
What motivates me is that I really enjoy the process. I enjoy it when I'm feeling sad. I enjoy it when I'm feeling happy. I get a great boost out of seeing what I've been doing actually take form and becoming something that was a blank piece of paper that all of a sudden becomes a moving, breathing creature. I want to be relatable, but at the same time, I can't say that I hit a wall where I wanted to give up ever. I feel, it's weird to say, I feel a little bit too lazy to give up. If you give up, you have to start all over with a whole big project. So I'd much rather finish what I started. But it's like, I mean, of course, you gotta keep reflecting and everything. There's a difference between, you know, being stubborn and fooling yourself. But I never felt like I got to a point where I was just fooling myself. I could still justify things for myself, and that's because I have tried to be very reflective in why I'm working in the medium that I'm working in and why I'm working on the projects that I'm working in. And as long as that reasoning doesn't somehow fall apart, it keeps giving me a reason to get back to things. That doesn't mean that you have to push all the times. It's okay to take breaks. Like, I have taken breaks as well. When I was studying at the animation workshop, I felt like I was hitting a little bit of a wall with my current version of Tales of Zale. So at that point I had to take a step back, and I wasn't working on it for more than a year. It was only after I'd picked up a lot of pieces that I could put back into the project and redefine the project that I was able to keep it going and continue it. And I think if I just tried to force myself over that wall without taking that break, I don't think that it would have resulted in a nice project. One of my first pieces of criticism in online, I remember very vividly, because it was somebody that wrote, well, you should be doing real animation rather than these garbage tweens, which was what I was doing when I was doing fan flashes. I was doing what's called tweening, which is sort of, or you just do automatic movements, and that was how I figured out how to make it move. I didn't even know you could do frame by frame and other techniques at that point. But I remember, that one, it really stung because it was like, oh, garbage tweens. And then I wrote to the person and it was like, oh, I'm sorry that came off a little bit harshly. What I meant was just that I think that hand-drawn animation would suit the animation style better, and I think that you can have a look at some of these animations and these animations for good reference, and otherwise good luck with your creative journey. So, behind some of those really harsh criticism points and, not so totally thought through comments, sometimes there's a very valid opinion that you can actually engage with and use for something, and I think it's very important to recognize that. There's also going to be trolls on the internet. That's how the internet is. Gotta sort of distinguish between the two. You can't use every piece of negative comment for something constructive. I want to do lots of things, but right now I want to do Tales of Zale, and that's my dream project at the moment. And maybe there'll be other dream projects later on, but one thing at a time. I'd love to do a feature film sometime. I have a few different ideas, both Tales of Zale related and also some that are not Tales of Zale related. Having a format where you can focus on one episode at a time, I feel like is a really nice way to grow, and it's also a format that has really appealed to me throughout time, to be able to follow along a character's journey from episode to episode, week to week, or whenever the new episode comes out. I always found that format really, really appealing, and it stuck with me more than a short or feature film sometimes did, because these characters would live with me in my thoughts throughout all those weeks. So I really like the series format. I think what I do can show part of an answer of what we can do in terms of getting things out to a wider audience and making things a commercial success, but I don't think it can stand on its own. I don't think that the current funding systems can stand on its own, and I don't think that the indie funding system can stand on its own. If you could connect the indie animation world with our current traditional funding system, you could solve some of the traditional funding system issues, that is that distribution is usually not very strong within these formats. On the other hand, distribution in indie animation and community-based animation that goes online is really strong. You get out to a wide audience, but you don't get a solid foundation for, paying your animators over many months. You get some bursts of money, and that can be a great supplement. But if we could merge those two together, if you're able to make those two meet, I feel like we could potentially look into a future where we could, really get some strong stuff out there internationally with a solid funding foundation. But of course, we need to renew the way that we think about funding. We need to be able to have some flexibility in laying the foundation over here, and at the same time being able to funnel the crowdfunded money and the merchandising and all the other stuff that I get from indie animation into that as supplements to fill out the cracks that are showing over here. That's the future that I'd love to see. Of course, that's the future that benefits me, but I think it could benefit a lot more people. That would be amazing.